Everybody, you got your cell phones out. This is going to be an addiction-friendly session here. So if you need to, let me just start out with Nir for a minute. I've been trying desperately to become addicted to something on my cell phone. So what is your advice? You know, I was trying to do. We just Instagrammed. If any of you can follow me on Instagram, or we just took a picture.
Yeah. No, you did the duck. He did the duck lips and everything. It was amazing.
And it just takes me a long time. So I want to be in Instagram more. But you are the expert on habits and addiction and maybe even unwinding addiction. But why don't you take us down that rabbit hole for a moment and tell us how you found this field, which you know everyone looks at you as the sort of guru of addiction and internet addiction, and tell us how bad it is.
Well, first I have to moderate that term addiction a little bit, because the book is not, my book is called How to Build Habit-Forming Products, not How to Build Addictive Products, because addictions are always bad, right? Addictions by definition are these persistent compulsive dependencies on a behavior or substance that harms the user. Unlike a habit, we have good habits as well as bad habits, right? Habits are these things that we do with little or no conscious thought, and most of them are very helpful, right? About half of what we do every single day is done out of habit. So the reason I wrote this book was because I saw the power that these companies have, like Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and Slack and Snapchat, to change human behavior, and I wondered, why can't we use those same exact techniques to help people form healthy habits in their day-to-day lives?
So a lot of this, I mean, many of you may remember the Skinner cage, B.F. Skinner, and the little pigeons that would, you know, click even when there was no food coming out. And I said to myself when I learned about that, I never want to be one of those pigeons. But are you telling us that overall we have become Skinners in a Skinner cage?
Well, I think for what we're looking for. So one of the key components of the hooked model, which is kind of the basis of my book and my work, is called the internal trigger. That the internal trigger is this prompt to action that starts within our own heads, as opposed to an external trigger with some kind of message that says, click here, buy now, play this. Those are all external triggers. Internal triggers tend to be negative emotions. So when we're lonely, we check Facebook. When we're uncertain, we Google. When we're bored, we check the news. We check stock prices, sports scores. So there has to be that internal trigger present in order to initiate that action. So if there is no internal trigger present, you can't make people do things they don't want to do. But when there is this internal trigger, when there's this pain point, then these products that provide relief are the ones that we turn to with little or no conscious thought.
So we've got Paul down here in the front row doing Instagram this. So what kind of internal trigger do you think he might, you know, I'm using him as an example. Hope that's okay, Paul. Yeah. You know, you did exactly what I asked you to, but like I'm sort of interested generally, Paul as a representative of mankind.
Yeah.
What kind, I mean, just make that real in terms of Paul is on his phone, we're here, we're listening. He is multitasking, which is something I do.
Sure.
But explain how that trigger in the kind of circle works in just real terms.
Yeah, so there's a few internal triggers that work for a product like Instagram. The first one is fear. Fear of losing the moment.
It's also the name of a book.
Yeah,
it's about to come out right now for those of you who are paying attention. Bob Woodward. I promised him a copy of it if he does real well today. So
only if I do well. But so the fear is the same fear that kept us clicking our Kodak cameras, right? It's this need to capture the moment, right? And so what Kodak spent billions of dollars in advertising to create an association with that internal trigger of, you know, before that moment is gone, capture it with a Kodak camera. The billions of dollars that they spent, Instagram spent almost no money. They had 12 people build a product that has billions of people now using it today, all based on that internal trigger of this fear of losing the moment, right? You want to capture it before it's gone. Now, the more we use a product like Instagram, we begin to associate it with other internal triggers. Now it's about FOMO. It's, you know, fear of missing out. Now it's about seeking connection, loneliness. It's these other internal triggers that through successive cycles, through these hooks, we form these associations with the use of the product to satiate this internal trigger.
So I imagine we have these hierarchy of needs or some roster of needs that are out there that can be triggered. And you've been one of the people to sort of work with firms and help, how do you develop habits? I guess my question is, and I don't mean to over-dramatize it, but how vulnerable are we? In other words, I know you've begun to sort of talk to people and say, hey, you can turn your notifications off, you can protect yourselves, you can turn, you know, you were talking about in one of the interviews I saw about the fact that you used to grab your phone at the evening before going to bed, before your spouse.
Right.
And so I guess how much do we have to? How much is on us?
Yeah.
And how vulnerable are we as a people?
Yeah. So addiction gets thrown around a lot these days, and I think
Just say big habits then.
Yeah.
We'll leave addiction.
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with habits per se, and the reason that I'm such a stickler for this delineation between addiction and habits is because an addiction denotes a loss of control. And there are some people, single-digit percentages of the adult population, that are actually addicted to technology because people get addicted to all sorts of things. I used to say when I started teaching this stuff, I used to say that technology is like cigarettes, that Ian Bogo said that technology is the cigarette of this century.
Right.
And I don't say that anymore because it's not really true. Cigarettes have nicotine, and nicotine is chemically addictive. It's not really like smoking cigarettes. Technology is like smoking cannabis. Why do I say that? Because there's nothing addictive about cannabis. There's no nicotine in cannabis, and yet 9% of people who have ever smoked cannabis have a cannabis use disorder. Not because there's anything addictive inside the cannabis, but because there's something else going on in their lives, that they're using cannabis to do the same thing that all addictions do, which is to help us escape from an uncomfortable reality. Now, most people, when that happens, if they start to hurt themselves, we have built into our brain this breaker that says, if you are causing harm, stop doing that, right? That's basic psychology. Now, some people can't stop. Some people, despite the harm they do to themselves, can't stop. Very low single-digit percentages. Doesn't mean we can ignore those people. And I wrote in The Atlantic a few years ago, about 3 years ago, an article.
And thank you for your
Yeah,
service.
my pleasure. I wrote an article about how I think companies need to have what I call a use and abuse policy, where they set some kind of number. The silver lining of all this data that's being collected upon us is that these companies know personal identifiable information about how much we use their products. So what I suggest companies do is to help these addicts, give me some kind of number. Is it 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week? How much is too much Facebook? And for those folks that trip that wire, we should send them a message that says, hey, you're showing behavior that are characteristic of a potential addiction. How can we help? For those people who are actually addicted. The rest of us who are not actually addicted, it's a personal responsibility issue. It's something that we can do something about. It's not an addiction, it's a bad habit. And bad habits are things that we can change.
There's a cute story about you in your old days as a consultant that you would have a variable rate for what you would charge. You would roll a die and just multiply it by what, 10 or something? So it was $600 or $100 or something of the sort. So I'm looking at this as free time for me that I can exploit this. So how do I make this Fitbit more of a habit and less drudgery?
Well, so every habit.
Does anybody have a Fitbit? Anybody still? They're really dying, aren't they? Sorry, Fitbit people, but I'm trying to love this, and I'm trying to make it something I really want to do more. But so I'm just interested in your insights, and again, come this in terms of a practical way, because I know you've come out of this and see things in ways that we don't. How might a regular person, an ordinary person, turn something they want, like more walking and better health, into a habit? So
this is the real power of habit-forming technology. I didn't write Hooked so that Facebook and Google and the gaming companies could use it. I wrote it so that the rest of us, can help people live happier, healthier lives by getting them to exercise more and, save money, make enterprise software something that people want to use as opposed to have to use. And so all of these products, in order to form a habit, have to have what's called a hook. So it has to have these 4 basic steps of a trigger. So the internal trigger and the external trigger have to be there. The internal trigger, there has to be a need, an innate human need that you are satisfying, an itch that you are scratching. You have to have an external trigger that prompts the user to action with some kind of information. Then the action itself has to be simple enough to give the reward. The reward has to have some element of variability, some bit of mystery. And then finally, there has to be an investment, something that the user does to make the product better and better with use and reload the next trigger to action. So I wish this was mind control. I wish this was something I could say, here, let me put some magic voodoo on your watch and make a new habit. You have to have, though, one, a person who wants to do the behavior, right? Everything that I teach is about persuasion as opposed to coercion. Coercion is getting people to do things they don't want to do. What I'm doing is helping people make technology that helps people do things they want to do. That's persuasion. So you have to have someone who wants to be persuaded, who wants to do that particular behavior. And then the product has to be well designed. We have to think about, with a lot of intent, with a lot of forethought, how do we make sure that this product has the trigger, the action, the reward, and the investment built into the experience?
I probably need more guilt in this. I guess when I'm thinking about this and thinking about some of the things that are coming online, various other apps, Arianna Huffington's Thrive app comes to mind. I don't know if you've looked at Thrive or heard about Thrive, but it is basically a disconnect strategy. So when you look out in the field and people are talking to you, do you see disconnection as one of the primary ways that people get independence from their addictions or the habits that tech companies seem to be thriving on?
Yeah, I think this is fantastic. I mean, look, I wrote Hooked for two reasons. Number one was because I wanted to help product makers build healthy habits in people's lives. I started 2 tech companies. I know how hard it is to change user behavior. So that was my first rationale. The second reason is that I saw how these products were changing my behavior in my own life in ways that I didn't always like.
What were your worst habits?
Oh, the typical stuff. We all got enamored by Facebook when it first came out, and text messages and email, and at times I overused these things too. The thing is, when you understand how this stuff works, you can do something about it. So I am all for these technologies, including the Thrive app. I mean, it's interesting that Google and Apple and Facebook are all investing into ways to help us use their products less. And they know that that's good for the long-term interests of their companies. When people get addicted to something, they use it for a while, but then they typically burn out because it harms them, right? When a product harms a person, typically, unless they're actually addicted, they stop using it. And so what we're finding for the vast majority of people out there, they're starting to reassess and say, you know what, this is great, but it's taking away something. It's coming at a price. The good thing is that there are thousands of apps. We just heard from Moment. There are thousands of apps and websites and services that help us disconnect. We just have to go out there and actually use them.
Have you ever looked internationally at what's going on? I'll be coming back to talk to some of you this afternoon about technology in the world and the globe. And it occurred to me that so much of our conversation has to deal with the United States, with tech companies here. If you're in Korea, or if you're in China, or India today, or Russia, where you've got pervasive tech culture and you have other companies that are operating there, do they have this same discussion going on between, whether there's a question about whether the public good is being served well enough in this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't study international as much. I focus mostly on the U.S. market because the vast majority of big tech companies are here, based in the U.S., and there's all kinds of tainting, when you go abroad, of whether it serves their national interests versus our big American companies.
Not to interrupt you, but it just occurs to me that in Europe, for instance, where they have this, what's called the GDPR, which are very serious privacy regulations. Many of you may be clicking on buttons that right now that are giving permission or re-giving permission to allow. But this seems to be a first step to say that we need a kind of state, or we need a watcher to make sure that extremes aren't taken. And I'm wondering, I know that you're promoting a kind of way that we can individually find a path, but do you think this could get serious enough that you actually need government to play a more constructive role in monitoring abuses and addictions?
For sure, there is room for regulation when it comes to all sorts of things with technology. I think that there's concern around these companies' monopoly status. I think there's a lot of concern about data privacy and infringement. The one area I can tell you I'm not concerned about, and where I don't think regulation would do much good, is trying to get these companies to make their products less engaging. That's ridiculous. Right. We want these companies to make products that we enjoy using. That's not a problem. That's progress. We want that. And so what we have to do, though, to sit here and hold our breath and wait for these companies to make their products less engaging, you're going to suffocate. It's pointless. So to wave our fists and say, Facebook, why is your product so engaging? It's silly. The fact is that there's so much we can do, and this is actually the subject of my next book, it's called Indistractable, is these very simple tactics that we need to take to put technology in its place. I mean, I love these gadgets. I love these devices. I don't want to go back to an age before the iPhone.
Of the book.
So I'll give you the 4, actually. So it's a little model where I show the difference between what's the opposite of distraction is traction, right? So everything that you plan to do is traction, things that move you forward in life. The opposite of that is distraction. So with that understanding, we can do 4 things to help us put distraction in its place. The first is to manage these internal triggers that fundamentally, look, the fact is, when I was checking my iPhone, instead of being with my daughter and having a conversation over dinner, it wasn't the iPhone that was doing it to me. There was stuff going on in my life that I was escaping with this device. All of these devices provide us an escape from an uncomfortable reality. And if we don't stop and ask ourselves, what are we escaping from? Why can't I sit here and have a conversation with another human being without looking at my phone? That's the first place to start. Distraction starts from within. So that's the first step. The second step is to plan our time. That you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. When people tell me, oh my God, the world's so distracting, and the iPhone and the Facebook and Trump, and I just can't get anything done, I say, show me your phone for a second. Can I see your calendar? What did you plan to do today? Let me see what's on your schedule. And you know what I typically find? Yeah. It's blank. There's nothing on the calendar. So you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it's distracting you from. We've got to plan our time, because if you don't plan your day, somebody else is going to plan it for you. The third strategy is to block out these external triggers. There is nothing that Zuckerberg can do if you uninstall that app from your phone. I love Facebook, but I don't use it on my phone. I use it on my desktop when I'm working. There's nothing Zuckerberg can do, right? You don't need it all day long. You can use it when I schedule in my calendar. That's my Facebook time. Every night at 6 p.m., that's my Facebook time. After dinner, that's when I check Facebook, not all day on my phone. There's nothing he can do if I disable the notification settings. You know, 2/3 of people with a smartphone never change their notification settings. 2/3. We cannot complain that technology is addictive when we haven't taken 10 minutes to turn off notifications.
That is what I'm actually addicted to. I'm addicted to changing my notification settings. On and off, on and off, on and off.
There you go.
Just flirting with myself about what I'll let through.
There you go.
I'm not kidding.
Really? You do? Actually change your notification settings?
And number 4?
So number 4 is to make pacts with yourself. So this is a very old technique starting from the time of the Odyssey with Ulysses, makes these commitment pacts. There are all these technologies that we can use today to block us in. So for example, I invested in a company called FocusMate, where it's kind of like chat roulette. Did you ever use chat roulette back in the day? It's like chat roulette, but without all the dirty bits. This is a way for you to essentially, you book a time to get focused work done with another person. They can be anywhere in the world. You go to this website. It's free. And you book that time, and in that time, you see the other person's face, and you say, okay, what are you working on? What am I working on? Go. And you do focused work with the other person knowing that you're also working. So that's a tool we can use to make a commitment pact. We can use other products, like I use Self-Control and Forest on my phone, these free apps that disconnect the web for set periods of time when I need to do focused work. So it's those 4 techniques of internal triggers.
Fascinating. They may all work for you. I want to go to the audience here in just a minute, but I do want to comment that I was very touched when I was looking through your Twitter feed, and I sort of see how this is working, because I saw the picture of your daughter's feet and flowers of something, so I see you merging some of your habits together. Yeah. But comments, questions from the floor? Yes, right here. How are you doing, Paul?
So far, so good.
Okay, good.
He doesn't have his phone out. That's good.
Okay,
Hi, my name is Michael Robb. I'm from Common Sense Media. I noticed the 4 points you just made about making us less distractible all seem to kind of stem from personal responsibility, and don't mention anything about responsibilities from others, be them industry folks or lawmakers or whoever. You did mention a little bit about having like a use and abuse policy, but I wonder if you have thoughts about what other responsibilities other people have besides ourselves.
Great question.
So outside of my purview, right, so I only look at how to make products things that people want to use. So in that context, I don't think that legislating or there's any special responsibility for companies to make their products less engaging. Unless there's a protected class of people that cannot make sound judgments on their own accord. Who would that be? Addicts, right? That's one category. And children. I think that's another category that we call a protected class. I wouldn't let my 10-year-old walk into a Las Vegas casino and start playing blackjack. I wouldn't let her order a gin and tonic in a bar. There are certain things that she cannot do. And I think that there should be certain restrictions around children. There already are some. But when it comes to the vast majority of us, able-bodied, able-minded adults, this is a personal responsibility issue. These products are not going to become less engaging. In fact, quite the opposite. They're going to continue to become better and more engaging. We have to learn the strategies to put them in their place.
Right. Real quick, in the very back.
Yes, I'm David Brazis. I'm a physician. Wondering how you would, if Facebook were to implement the strategy that you proposed, where they ping people who are, abusive of it to their own detriment, what would you have them tell their stockholders about the people who aren't being well monetized?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt them at all from a stock perspective. By the way, I've talked to all the big tech companies about this. I talked to Snapchat and Reddit and several of these companies about this use and abuse policy, including Facebook. And the fact is, the platform would be better for it. We all know that one person in our friend network that uses the product way too much, right? The product would be better, our experience would be better if these folks moderated their use as well. And frankly, it's good for the company's bottom line to retain users over the long term, not to burn them out by having them use a ton and then say, oh, this is terrible, I don't want to use this anymore. So I think it's in everybody's interest to have these use and abuse policies. But to be clear, this is for the small fraction of the user base that does have an actual addiction. By the way, if the user doesn't want to stop, I'm not saying we should be Big Brother and say we're going to cut you off. I don't think that's the right policy either. But I do think that there's a place for us to say, look, here's our policy. If you use more than this number of hours, we're going to try and help you find some resources to manage this addiction.
Well, I really appreciate that. I want to just say, just as we wrap up in the last question, Jack Dorsey was in Washington the last couple of weeks and talking about Twitter. And to your point, it's a slightly different subject, but it's part of the social contract question between tech companies and society, is that certain firms, and his was one of them, deleted a lot of the frozen, a lot of the accounts that were inactive or maybe were active and not people, and they took a 25% hit in their market share, and he said it was the right thing to do. So there are people struggling with these very questions. Nir, thank you. I really look forward to, tell people how they can get Indistractable.
Sure. Yeah, so Indistractable will be out early next year, and my website is nirandfar.com if you want updates on that.
Nir and Far, N-I-R and Far. It's kind of cool. It's a great website. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nir.
Thanks, Steve.